And when you have a manager, I mean, I'd love to hear about your experience in the like the W-2 world, I guess, with
Sure.
IT and everything, because you've talked a little bit about that. But when you come from a space of not hearing your ideas heard, of dealing with the difficult customers, of not not having your ideas listened to, and then all of a sudden you go from that place to being the guy, being the
Mm-hmm.
boss, and you're having the weights and responsibility. I think it gives you so much more value as a entrepreneur because
Right.
now, like you said, it's the whole delegation example. You understand what these people have gone through, and so even if they have an idea that you don't agree with, it's like you know how to let them down easy without crushing their spirit.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, working within parameters that you can't control makes it a little bit more difficult to be a visionary,
Yes.
and that's part of W-2. That's part of being the part, in the machine, if you will. But, I've had a manager is more than somebody who delegates, right? Like in some
Right.
way they have to be a leader
Yeah.
and as a mentor more than anything.
A
Yes.
good
Um,
manager.
a good
Yeah.
manager,
Yeah. A good
yeah,
one.
a good manager should be a mentor, and it's not a matter of like you don't have to get super personal with your employees or have to get to a place where there's like this rapport that's
Yeah.
a mutual respect in a sense that it's equal.
Sure.
A manager should be there because they've earned the right
Hmm.
to serve actually.
Hmm.
More so than just to be a leader, but to also be able to say, what do you need and how can I set you up for success?
Interesting.
That's the wrong way to look at it is a hierarchy. That's not how this works. If that employee fails, the manager can fire them, but he's still under scrutiny from the person above him because it's like it was your job,
Hmm.
it was your role to make sure that person was successful, and it's all trickle down from there. So the way I look at it is like the managers I've had in my time as an employee failed me in the sense that, when I would come up with an idea or something, rather than fostering those things or actually being curious, it was more like, no, that's not how we do things here. And so that would create a reluctancy for me to want to go the extra mile.
Huh.
It's creating an environment where I no longer feel like I want to take the initiative because I know what I'm going to be met with resistance. Whether I'm right or wrong, like if you don't foster that curiosity in your employees or other people, it tends to have a long-standing effect. I've got this situation with even one of my guys. They're 1099, but there was a moment in time where one of them made a very big mistake, and he was under the purview of another company that we work with, and because of that mistake, the other company, the owner was very upset.
Hmm.
And I had to talk him off the ledge because that employee or that 1090, that contractor, I knew his personal situation. I knew he
Hmm.
had a special needs kid at home, and like,
Yeah.
the money that he makes does not equate to being able to cover the cost of a mistake like this. And I had to pull this other owner aside. And I said, "Look, man, we're pretty much everything here. We're the accountability here. We
Yeah.
have the insurance. We have, like if anything happened, then yes, he made a mistake. But understand, if you reprimand him for that mistake, he's going to do it again on accident, and he's never going to come to you with that mistake
Hmm.
because he's going to be too afraid of having to pay for that mistake on the back end, and he can't afford it to begin with." So like the way you approach that is how a good manager should be able to say, okay, like, okay, let me be compassionate in this moment. Let me sit with this like frustration, and then let me
Yeah.
actually be tactful about how I approach this. And I never experienced that in the W-2 world. I never had managers who were like, "Hey, I see your value. I want to cultivate that. What are you excited about? What do you think you excel at? What do you want to try to learn?" It was more or less like, "Here's your role. If you're afraid of ladders, don't be a." You know what I mean? Like it
Yeah.
was like, "Oh, you
Yeah.
don't know how to use a hole hog to drill holes in studs." Like like no one showed me how to do this stuff. It's that macho
Dang,
bravado of
dude.
like, earn your stripes and like suffer in silence and just don't be a baby, don't be a whatever. And that's just like, I don't know. It's a lot of trauma,
Yeah, dude.
both inflicted
Freaking
and
sucks.
like the root of how we treat employment.
Yeah.
And so my experience with W-2 has always been one of just not feeling like I was adequate enough to ever level up or climb the ranks like they say. And it's like, you can't climb the ranks if somebody else feels threatened that you're going to do something better than them.
Yes.
Very
Or
true.
that you're
Very
going to
true.
provide more value than them. And someone's
So
going to
true.
identify that and say, hey, Joe, why aren't you doing your job? Because he did that in 30 minutes and it takes you 4 days to send an email. You know, like that's the reality of it. You know, people
Yeah.
get comfortable, people decide that like they want to get complacent because they're not being held accountable for things. And over time, it just becomes normal. You know, like I know so many people who work in high pressure jobs that if they don't get something done in a certain timeline, they are reprimanded or just flat out fired because the next person's waiting in line for their job. And at the end of the day, it's like it creates this culture of two things. One, it's like fear that your job is always on the line. And then on the other side, the people who really don't want to like bring any value to the table. They just kind of get by every single day and they're like, oh yeah, I'm just going to do the bare minimum. And I also realized like even when I was pushing myself harder than I could have in a job, it was all about the perspective. For me, the perspective was, okay, well, what am I gaining out of this? I remember when I was doing home AV, I was crawling through attics. I was having to conquer my fear of ladders. I was doing like real hard manual labor. I literally digging trenches to run cabling to like people's pool and limestone,
Dang.
you know, like it was part of my job for 2 years. And I realized I was like, holy shit, I feel healthier than I ever have though. Like I'm like losing weight.
Yeah.
I'm like starting to like feel physically so much better. And I'm learning a lot of cool different skills. And so I had to kind of change my perspective on like, you know, it was hard work and it sucked from day to day, but you know, it was going to suck anywhere else I went. You know what I mean? Like if my mind is stuck in that perpetual state of being, like I would always be running from the problems I identified as problems and not seeing them as opportunities. And so I was just like, okay, I'm just going to keep doing this. And eventually, like, I'm going to challenge myself to see what I can do. And then if my manager doesn't see that, you know, I mean, I got laid off from that job in favor of some guy who did meth on the job site
Love
constantly.
that. That's great.
And-
of course,
and-
he outworked you.
Yeah, and it's like, and I'm looking at it as like, why did I get laid off when this guy's sleeping on the job site and doing drugs before work? And there's no reason. Like I can't question that and be like,
Yeah.
oh, poor me, like blah blah blah. I can't challenge it. It's like it was what it was. Let me move on and do the next thing. And you know, if a manager's perception is self-preservation because their job pays them well and whatnot, of course they're not going to want to cultivate excellence. They're not going to cultivate somebody who can outshine them.
Dude, that's so true.
You know?
Yeah.
So it's like, but can you imagine that one person who's really cultivating that, someone who's like mentoring everybody, and then your team is so much stronger and you
Dude.
could have a place where like you're seeing increased revenue, you're seeing increased, you know, mental wellness, you're seeing increased performance, you know, and yeah, that's a lot easier than we make it out to be, but
It is.
it's
Yeah.
just ego, man.